The road smelled like rain and diesel, and something older than both. Deputy Carla Reyes noticed the smell before she noticed the man. A faint electric sweetness, like the air after lightning, except the sky above the Kansas highway was clear and starred and indifferent. She had the window down because the cruiser's AC had been broken since October. And she'd learned to read the night through her nose, the way some people read it through their eyes. She saw him in the headlights a half-second before Wendell did. What in the, I see him. She hit the brakes. The man was walking barefoot down the center line of County Road 14, heading nowhere in particular, wearing what looked like a hospital gown that had been through a war. His feet were the color of the asphalt. His gait was steady and mechanical in a way that set something off in Carla's chest. Some alarm that had no name. She pulled the cruiser onto the shoulder. The man stopped. He didn't flinch from the lights, didn't shade his eyes, just stood there looking at them with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not calm exactly, more like someone who had used up every other emotion, and this was what remained. Sir. She opened her door, one hand on the frame, one on her belt. Sir, can I ask what you're doing out here? The man turned to face her fully. He was maybe 50 or maybe 100. It was hard to say. His face had the kind of lines that came not from age, but from experience, too compressed to process. And his eyes, when the headlights caught them, were dark and very still, like water at the bottom of a well. Walking, he said. His voice was low, undamaged by whatever had happened to the rest of him. Wendell came around the front of the cruiser, thumbs in his belt, doing his official presence thing. Walking where? The man looked at the road ahead of him, as if the answer might be written there. I'm not certain yet. Carla and Wendell exchanged a look over the hood. They brought him in, which was the protocol for someone barefoot and potentially unwell on a county road at 2 in the morning. They put him in interview 2, with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and a foil blanket he folded neatly in his lap like a napkin. Carla sat across from him and asked the standard questions. Name? A pause. You can call me Paige. Address? A longer pause. I don't have one currently. Any identification? Pressed his lips together, and something moved behind his eyes. A flicker of something she recognized later as grief. Not on me. She typed it all in. The dispatch board was quiet. In the break room, eating the last of the birthday cake that had been sitting on the counter for 3 days. She was alone with this man, and the hum of the fluorescents, and whatever it was that had gotten into the air around him, that electric sweetness, which she was no longer sure was the road. Paige, she said, and he looked at her with those deep water eyes. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? No. He said it simply, with no performance in it. Then, after a moment, thank you for asking. She leaned back in her chair. She'd been a deputy for 9 years, and she had seen drifters and veterans and people in the middle of breakdowns. And this man was none of those things, or possibly all of them. But what he mostly was alone in a way that had a specific weight to it. A specific gravitational pull, like standing next to something very dense. How did you end up on County Road 14? He looked at his hands in his lap, the foil blanket. He turned his right hand over and looked at the palm. A habit. Like someone checking the time on a watch they'd forgotten they'd sold. I came down on the other side of the Hankins field, he said. About 3 miles back. Came down, Wendell said from the doorway. He was holding a piece of cake on a paper towel and had the look of a man who had just discovered a hobby. Paige glanced at him and back at Carla. He seemed to be making a decision, and it seemed to cost him something. I've been away for a long time, he said finally. This is the first time I've been back. Outside, the Kansas sky was doing what it always did. Enormous and slow and full of stars that nobody down here had the time to look at properly. Carla had grown up under that sky. She knew every constellation that a person learns in the 4th grade and then forgets because there's always something on the ground demanding attention. It occurred to her, looking at Paige, that he did not look like someone who had forgotten. He looked like someone for whom the sky was a personal fact, the way a house is a personal fact, the way a father's face is a personal fact. She brought him more coffee. He didn't drink this one either, but he wrapped both hands around the cup. Back from where, she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on the highway. The fluorescent above them hummed its single note. Somewhere that doesn't have a name you'd recognize, he said. She should have written that down as subject disoriented, possibly delirious. She should have called Dr. Darnell at the medical center and had him looked over. She did both of those things, eventually. First, she stayed in her chair and looked at Paige and understood, in the way that sometimes you understand something before you can explain it, that he was not confused. He was very, very precise. Okay, she said. He looked at her with something almost like surprise, as if that single syllable was more than he'd expected. "Okay," he said back, Dr. Ch arrived at 4 in the morning, running on coffee and the low-grade adrenaline of a man who had been called out too many times to be fully alarmed by it anymore. He was 63, had practiced in Whitmore County for 30 years, and prided himself on having seen everything. He came out of interview 2 after 40 minutes and stood in the hallway with Carla and said nothing for a moment that lasted longer than was comfortable. "His vitals are normal," Darnell said. "Good. His bone density is irregular." He paused. "Very irregular." "Okay. His core temperature is 94.1. Is that dangerous?" Darnell looked at the door of interview 2. "A human being? Absolutely. What about 4? Carla." He turned to look at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man trying to find a wall to put his back against. "He's not injured. He's not impaired. He's not psychotic. He knows who he is. He just doesn't." He stopped. "Doesn't what?" "Doesn't match," Darnell said. "His blood work doesn't match. His chemistry doesn't match. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never once had a patient who..." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I need to make some calls." "No," Carla said. Darnell looked at her. "Not yet," she said. "Give me an hour." She didn't know why she said it. She would think about that for a long time afterward. And what she would conclude was that it had something to do with the man's face, when he pressed his lips together at the question about identification. Flicker of grief. She had learned in 9 years to read grief. She knew what it looked like when it was fresh, and when it was old, and when it had hardened into something a person was carrying. Not because they couldn't set it down, but because setting it down would make it real, in a way that carrying it never quite did. Paige was carrying a loss the size of a planet. She went back in. He was still sitting with the foil blanket in his lap. The coffee cups were lined up in front of him like a small museum of his stay here. He looked up when she came in, and something in his face opened slightly, the way a window opens when someone finally decides to let the air in. "What are you?" She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table. She asked it like she was asking what he did for work, or how he took his coffee. Paige looked at her for a long time. "Mother was from a small town in central Illinois," he said. "She was a school librarian. Her name was Frances. She met my father in 1971 at a county fair. She won a stuffed bear in the ring toss game and gave it to him because she already had enough bears at home," she said. "And he had the kind of face that needed a bear." He paused. He kept it his whole life. It was on the shelf above his desk when he died. Carla waited. "I am those people's son," Paige said. "That is what I am." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He looked at the coffee cups. "I am also something else. Something that happened to me, or that I became, or that was always there, and just took a long time to surface. I don't have a good word for it in English. The closest is probably..." He turned his hand over again, that checking, the watch gesture. "The closest is probably refugee." "Refugee from what?" He was quiet again. Then he said, "Have you ever lost a child?" The question landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. "No," she said. "I lost a world," he said. "Not metaphorically, not as an expression of how sad I was, a world. 4 billion people. The place where everything was. And I was not there when it happened because I had been sent away to try to stop it. And I failed to stop it. And then I was not allowed back. Very long time." He stopped. His voice had not changed in pitch or volume. It had changed in something harder to name. Weight, maybe. Density. "I am the last of what I was." The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and went to voicemail. Carla thought about her mother, who lived 40 minutes north of here in a house that still smelled like the same laundry detergent it had smelled like when Carla was 8. She thought about the way her mother's kitchen light was always on when she drove past at night, even when her mother was asleep, because her mother had the habit of forgetting to turn it off. And Carla had stopped pointing that out. because she'd decided she liked seeing it there. She thought about what it would mean to have all of that go away. Not gradually, not the way things fade when time moves through them, but all at once, and irrevocably and wrong. "I'm sorry," she said. Paige nodded once. It was a very old nod. "How long were you out there?" she asked. "Out away. How long?" He looked at the table. 63 years by your reckoning, longer by mine." She thought about that. She thought about a man carrying something for 63 years, and then finding himself barefoot on a county road at 2 in the morning. Because that was what happened when you finally came home and discovered that home had changed so completely around you that you no longer knew how to navigate it, except on foot. "Why did you come back?" she asked. He lifted his eyes from the table and looked at her, and the thing in his eyes was not grief anymore. Or not only grief. It was something else. She had seen it before, she realized, in a photograph. The last photograph ever taken of a man she'd read about in school. A soldier who had kept fighting alone in the jungle for 29 years, because no one had told him the war was over. The expression in that photograph was not bravery or stubbornness or delusion. It was simpler than all of that. "I don't know how to be the kind of person who stops. Because this is still here," Paige said. "Because you're still here. Because the road is still here, and the fields are still here, and there are still people asleep in the houses I can see from a mile up, and they don't know, they genuinely don't know, how impossible that is. Fragile. How?" He stopped again, and this time the pause was different. Longer, more careful. "I need you to understand something," he said. "It's coming. What I was sent to try to prevent the first time and failed too. It isn't coming the way things come in your films. It doesn't come with fire. It doesn't come loud. It comes as a correction. A system deciding that something taking up space could be better used as something else. They don't hate you. They simply find you inefficient." Carla's hands were still flat on the table. She was aware of her own breathing. "They're coming back," she said. It wasn't a question. "They never left," he said. "They've been watching. Recalculating. Deciding whether the result of the last intervention was sufficient." "And was it?" He smiled for the first time. It was a small smile and a tired one, but it was real. "The fact that you're sitting across from me asking me that question suggests it was not quite sufficient from their perspective." "What do you need?" she asked. He reached into the pocket of the hospital gown. She had not noticed a pocket until now, and set something on the table between them. It was small, cylindrical, and emitted no light. No light, but standing near it felt like standing near an open window. Like something elsewhere was breathing through it. "I need a phone," he said. "A very specific kind of signal. And I need about 6 people who are not going to panic. We have 3 deputies on shift. That's a start." Wendell had come back to the doorway at some point during this. She wasn't sure when, and was standing there with his paper towel and his finished cake, and an expression she had never seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man seeing the thing that explains all the other things. "Wendell," she said. "Yeah, wake Buckner up." "Yeah," he said again. The sun came up over the Hankins field, the way it always did, which was gradually, and then all at once, the way most irreversible things happen. Paige had been given dry socks, a pair of Wendell's extra boots that were 2 sizes too large, and a flannel shirt from the Lost and Found that still had someone else's name written in the collar in black marker. He wore all of it without comment. He drank the 3rd cup of coffee. Finally, in small careful sips, standing at the window of the break room, watching the sky get lighter. Carla watched him watch it. She understood, in a way she had not expected to, why he had walked down the center line of County Road 14 in the middle of the night. Not because he was lost, because he was taking it in. Because a county road at 2 in the morning is one of the places on Earth where you can most clearly feel the size of the world, the way the darkness holds it. And if you had spent 63 years without that feeling, the first thing you would want to do is walk out into it and let it happen to you. She had made 4 calls. None of the people she called had gone back to sleep. Buckner arrived at 6:15 with dark circles under his eyes and a thermos of his wife's coffee, which was better than the station coffee by a significant margin. Charlotte Welty arrived at 6:30, off duty but in uniform anyway, because that was Charlotte, Mrs. Mallison from the County Emergency Management Office, SUFIS, arrived at 7, because Carla had known her for 11 years and trusted her completely, and because if they were going to do this right, they were going to need someone who understood logistics. Dr. Darnell had never left. Paige had assembled the device on the break room table, using components that Carla could not identify, but that he assembled with the kind of practiced, unhurried precision of someone who had done this before, under worse conditions. He explained what each piece did in terms that were technically incomprehensible and emotionally very clear. It would create a signal. Signal would reach something that had been listening for it for a long time. What came back would be a conversation, not an attack. The distinction mattered enormously. "What are you trying to tell them?" Mrs. Mallison asked. She was 61 years old, had survived 2 floods, 1 county scandal involving the road budget, and the loss of her husband. She asked the question with the directness of a person who had stopped being impressed by things that were supposed to be impressive. "That this is still worth keeping," Paige said. "That sounds like a hard case to make. It's the only case worth making." She considered that. She poured herself more of Buckner's wife's coffee. "All right," she said. What they didn't know, what Paige tried to explain, and what took a while to land because it was genuinely difficult to fit inside a human head, was that the entity they were signaling had no emotional architecture. It did not have fear or mercy or nostalgia. What it had was a calculus of efficiency that was centuries older than the first civilization that had ever mapped a star, and it made decisions the way water makes decisions, not through intention, but through the accumulated logic of pressure and path, and the simple persistence of finding the line of least resistance. The last time it had turned its attention to this system, it had found a species that had barely learned to put iron in a furnace. The calculation then had been insufficient complexity, insufficient integration, insufficient probability of contributing to the larger pattern. The result had been what Paige's people called the first dimming, a gentle redirect of resources, a reallocation of certain atmospheric conditions, a nudge, cruel, not intended to end things, just a correction. It had nearly ended everything anyway. What had changed, Paige said, was not the species itself, but the measurement. What they were using to evaluate you was not what you built, or how fast you moved, or how much of the sky you'd learned to reach. It was something older and harder to quantify, something that the calculus had been updated over eons to notice. Whether, under pressure, the thing being observed generated signal, and whether that signal was novel, and whether that novelty had any relationship to the kind of thing that kept the larger pattern interesting. "It's looking for something surprising," Charlotte said. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, and her expression was the concentrated expression of someone solving a puzzle that matters. "Essentially," Paige said. Surprising like I walked down that road at 2 in the morning instead of landing in a field outside Washington," he said. "Surprising like your deputy stayed in the room and asked the right question. Surprising like the fact that you're all in a break room in Kansas City, drinking someone's wife's coffee, and trying to save your world in the most low-key possible manner." The almost smile again. That kind of surprising. Carla realized she had been holding tension in her shoulders since 2 in the morning, and that something about those words had released it slightly. She rolled her neck. The room smelled like coffee and old paper and Buckner's breakfast sandwich. "We're not special," she said. "You're not," he agreed. "That's what's special." They sent the signal at 9:14 in the morning, while the Hankins field was gold in the early light, and a dog was barking somewhere 2 properties over, and a crop duster was beginning its first run of the day 3 miles to west. The engine a thin sound above the silence. The device hummed for 11 seconds and then went quiet. Nothing visible happened. The sky did not change. The dog kept barking. Paige stood very still. "How long?" Carla asked. "It depends on whether they were already close." He paused. "If they were close, we'll know within the hour." They waited. Buckner refilled everyone's cups, Mrs. Mallison called her office to say she'd be late and did not explain why. Dr. Darnell sat in the corner with his hands on his knees and looked at Paige with the expression of a man revising his understanding of everything he thought he knew, which was uncomfortable, but also, she could see, quietly thrilling to him. Charlotte stood at the window watching the road. At 9:41, the device hummed again. One short pulse. Page closed his eyes. Is that good? Wendell asked. It means they received it. Is that good? Page opened his eyes. He looked at the table, at the device, at the window, and the golden field beyond it. He looked at all of them in turn. Carla, Wendell, Buckner, Charlotte, Mrs. Mallison, Darnell, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It settled. Not relief exactly. Not peace exactly. Something between the two. Some state that didn't have an English word for it. That she suspected had a word in whatever language he'd been thinking in for the past 63 years. It means they're still calculating, he said. Which means they haven't decided. Which means there's still time, Charlotte said. There is always still time until there isn't, he said. That's the only law I've ever found to be universal. The second response came 40 minutes later and lasted 3 pulses. Page listened to it with his eyes closed and both hands flat on the table, not touching the device, just near it, the way you might rest your hands near something hot. Close enough to feel it without being burned. The room was very quiet. Outside, the crop duster made another pass. Cheen. When he opened his eyes, his expression had changed again. She was learning to read it, she thought. She was learning the vocabulary of his face. The way you learn a route you weren't born knowing, but that becomes yours through repetition. This expression was not the grief expression, and not the settled expression. It was new. She didn't have a category for it yet. They want a demonstration, he said. Of what? He looked at Carla, then at each of the others, then back at Carla. Of why it matters that you're here, he said. They want to know what you would lose. The silence stretched. It was Mrs. Mallison who spoke first, because of course it was. Because she was a woman who had spent 30 years in emergency management and understood that when the thing being asked is impossible, the only option is to start somewhere and see what you find. My husband, she said. 31 years. He had a laugh that started in his stomach. I used to be able to hear it 2 rooms away. He died 4 years ago, and I still turn to say something to him sometimes. Just out of habit. When something funny happens and for a second he's almost there. That's what I'd lose. The second before I remember. Nobody tried to follow that with something more. Then Buckner said, my daughter, she's 8. She wrote me a note last Tuesday that said, Daddy, I love you so much it fills up all the space. I have it in my wallet right now. He stopped. His voice was steady. All the space. Wendell said, my mom taught me to drive in an empty parking lot. She was a terrible teacher. She screamed the whole time. It was the happiest afternoon of my life. Charlotte said, the first time I ever felt competent at anything, really competent, genuinely good at something, was the first day I wore this uniform. I'd like to keep feeling that. Darnell said, I've delivered 412 babies. I know the exact number. Each one of them came in. And then the world had one more person in it than it did before. I want to be there for 413. Paige looked at Carla. She thought about the kitchen light. Her mother's kitchen, always on. 40 minutes north. There's a light that's always on, she said. At my mother's house, she forgets to turn it off. When I drive past at night, even if I'm not stopping, even if it's 2 in the morning after a bad shift, it's there. I've been annoyed by it. I've asked her to turn it off. I don't really want her to turn it off. She paused. I'd like to keep driving past it. The device pulsed, not 1 pulse, not 3. A long rolling sequence like Morse code transcribed by something that thought in mathematics. Paige listened to it with his whole body, she thought. Not just his ears, but some other faculty. Something she could feel the edge of the way you can feel the edge of a magnetic field without seeing it. When it stopped, he sat down. He sat down heavily, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he was holding. Well, Carla asked. They're deferring the correction, he said. Indefinitely. Pending continued observation. The room absorbed that. The crop duster made another pass. The dog had stopped barking. What does indefinitely mean? Charlotte asked. In their framework, anywhere from a generation to a geological epoch. He looked at the window. Long enough. Long enough for what? Wendell asked. Whatever you're going to become next. Paige turned his head to look at him. They're curious. That's new. In 4 billion years of doing this, I have never once heard them described as curious about a world they were correcting. They want to see what happens. He paused. So do I. Carla looked at the device on the table, which was now dark and still, and looked. In this light like something someone might use to tune a radio, if radios could tune to frequencies that stretched between stars. "What do you do now?" she asked. "You go." Page looked at his hands, palm up in that checking the watch gesture. This time, he didn't look like someone checking for a watch they'd lost. He looked like someone reading something that was actually written there. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's a start," she said. He looked at her, and the almost smile came back, and this time it was less tired. "Shh." Wendell got up and got another cup of coffee, and brought it back and set it in front of Page without comment. Page looked at it, he picked it up, he drank it. All of it this time, to the bottom. The outside the window, the Kansas morning was doing what Kansas mornings do, which is proceed. The field was gold. The road was gray. The sky was enormous and blue and full of things that would look like stars from a sufficient distance and look like everything else at sufficient closeness. Suns, planets, the long, slow architecture of a universe that had been asking questions since before there was anyone to ask them back to. Page stayed 3 more days. He slept on the cot in the break room and ate at the diner on County Route 9, where Carla ate on her off days, and he ordered the same thing every time. Scrambled eggs and white toast and coffee, with the careful solemnity of someone performing a ritual they had been denied for a very long time. Talked to Mrs. Mallison about emergency infrastructure, about early warning systems for events that had no category in any existing database. Talked to Dr. Darnell about biology and what it meant for a body to be shaped by 60 years of a different gravity, a different atmosphere, a different quality of silence. He talked to Charlotte about what it felt like to wear a uniform that meant something, and how kept that meaning from wearing away. Psst. He talked to Carla most in the mornings before the shift started, standing outside the station while the sun came up and the highway stretched empty and silver in both directions. "Do you miss it?" she asked one morning. "Your world." He was quiet for a moment. Truck went past, hauling something covered in blue tarps, headed west. "I miss the smell of it," he said. "I miss the specific quality of its evening light. I miss a kind of tree that grew along the river near where I grew up, that had bark like old paper and made a sound in the wind like someone turning pages." He paused. "I miss my people. Tell me about them." He did. He told her about a civilization that had learned to travel through space, not by building engines powerful enough to overcome distance, but by learning to care about it less, to regard the immensity between stars, not as an obstacle but as a texture, something to move through the way you move through water, with some resistance and some pleasure, and the acceptance that you would arrive changed. He told her about what they ate and how they grieved and how they laughed, which was rarely but completely, and how they measured value not in resources but in irreplaceability. A thing was precious not because it was rare but because it was the only instance of its specific kind of being, and that instance could not be recreated. "That's why they're keeping you," he said. "Not because you're advanced enough, not because you're powerful enough, because you're irreplaceable, in a way they didn't account for, because the kinds of things that happen here." He gestured at the road, the field, the diner down the way with its single lit sign, "Don't happen elsewhere." Specific shape of it, the way it goes. Carla looked at the highway, at the diner sign, at the sky behind it, which was doing the orange and pink thing that Kansas skies did in the 40 minutes before full day. "It's just a county road," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." On the 3rd morning he was gone. Shh, not dramatically. Not the way disappearances usually registered in her experience, which was in the negative space of an absence. He had left the flannel shirt folded on the cot, and Wendell's boots side by side under it, and the foil blanket unfolded and smoothed flat with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lot of time being grateful for shelter. Shh. On the break room table was the was coffee cup from that first morning, the one she'd brought him, that he hadn't drunk. He'd left a note under it. 4 words, in a handwriting that was careful and slightly unfamiliar, like someone working in a language they'd learned late. Still worth keeping. She put the note in the inside pocket of her jacket, where she kept the things she didn't want to lose. On her drive home, she went 2 miles out of her way to pass her mother's house. It was 6:15 in the morning, and the sky was enormous and full of light, and the kitchen's window was exactly where it always was. The light inside it a warm yellow rectangle against the pale dawn. Her mother was asleep somewhere in the back rooms, having left it on again. Carla slowed down. She didn't stop. She sat there, idling on the shoulder of the road, and looked at the light. She thought about a calculation being made somewhere she couldn't see, running its impossibly long arithmetic on the question of whether something like this. A kitchen light at 6 in the morning. A woman in a patrol car looking at it. The specific quality of that looking contributed to a pattern worth preserving. She thought it did. She thought it did, and she thought that was enough, and she put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road and went home as the sun came up behind her, full and ordinary and irreplaceable, turning everything it touched into the particular gold of a morning that had decided, against all probability, to continue. In a break room in Whitmore County, in a sheriff's station on County Route 9, a device sat dark and silent on a table beside 4 empty coffee cups. It looked like nothing. It felt, to anyone who stood near it, like an open window. The dog down the road had started barking again. Somewhere above the stratosphere, something paused in its calculation and noted the signal and updated its record and moved on to the next question, as it had for 4 billion years, making its slow, deliberate way through the accumulated evidence of a universe that kept producing things it hadn't predicted. On a country highway in Kansas, the world continued. It did not do this quietly or easily or without cost. It did it the way it always had, the only way it knew, one ordinary morning at a time, one ordinary person at a time, one light left burning in an empty kitchen for no reason except that it was there, and it was warm, and someone might come by who needed to see it. That was enough. That had always been enough. The question was just whether anyone with the math to know it had taken the time to notice. One had once from a long distance. He'd walked 3 miles down a county road barefoot at 2 in the morning to say so. And if you want to know whether it worked, whether any of it mattered, whether the calculation came out the way Carla Reyes believed it would, when she drove past her mother's kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, with someone else's 4 words in her inside pocket. Look up. Take a minute. Look up at what's still there. There's your answer.